Now, at this point in the book, and I want you to remember that this isn't a book. This is another human being's life. And at this point in Alistair's life, he actually got moved to another facility, another prison camp that was for people that were in really bad shape. And he was there. He went through some recovery time. And that's a very important part of the book. And then he begins working on the docks, unloading food stores for the Japanese soldiers and loading them. And eventually, it comes time for him to be moved. And so they move the prisoners of war by shipping them. On 4 September 1944, 900 British POWs were rushed up the gangway of the Kachadoki Maru, a 10,000-ton cargo vessel that had been named the President Harrison before it was captured from the Americans. Using sticks, the Japanese drove us like cattle aboard the ship and down into the holds. We could never move fast enough for them. The liner had 2 holds, both quite obviously not made to accommodate human beings, yet they wanted around 450 of us in each. The lads below were shouting, begging, and pleading for the Japanese not to let in any more men. But the louder they shouted, the more frenzied the guards became. Down and down we went into the depths of hell. Nothing in all of our suffering had prepared me for anything like this, and even today I can scarcely find the words to describe the horrors of the Kachadoki Maru. By the time I got down to the hold, I had nowhere to sit. It was standing room only, most of us packed in like sardines with no toilet facilities. Most had dysentery, malaria, beriberi, and all manners of tropical diseases. Once inside, and the hold crammed full, the Japanese battened down the hatches, plunging us into a terrifying black pit. At that moment, the most fearful clamor went up as claustrophobia and panic gripped the men. Many feared they were doomed and began screaming and shouting. Yet a strange tranquility came over me. I felt resigned and just thought, this is it. I thought that we would never get out alive and would never see home again. You felt resigned to accept this as your last. I could only think that they were taking us out to sea to sink the ship and drown us all. Our captors were capable of it. I had seen what they were capable of anything. We knew nothing about these ships, which would become infamous in the annals of the Second World War history as hell ships. A fleet of dozens of rusting hulks used to shuttle supplies and prisoners around Japan's Far Eastern Empire. Some of the most appalling episodes of the war occurred on these ships, in which men, driven crazy by thirst, killed fellow prisoners to drink their blood. In some cases, prisoners trying to escape from the seething mass of hysterical captives were shot by Japanese soldiers. Some voyages took weeks, with only a handful of prisoners surviving. Men drank their own urine. Sick prisoners were trampled to death or suffocated. The sane murdered the insane and wondered when it would be their turn to go mad. Cannibalism, as well as vampirism, was not unknown, and even Japanese medics were shocked by what they found when the holds were finally opened. In the case of the Oroko Maru, where insane prisoners killed fellow man for their blood, only 271 men survived out of 1,619. So all those times that you think of horror movies, and they don't seem realistic and you don't think it could ever happen, it has happened. There must have been at least one officer, a warrant officer, or a sergeant major somewhere in the hold, but they certainly didn't make themselves known. Discipline had gone. Everyone, whatever their rank, was in the same situation. All of us just wanted to survive and were prepared to do anything to ensure that happened. It would have taken a very brave man to try and take command of the men in the hold in these conditions. It would have been suicidal. And again, that's one of those points where, every book we've talked about, no matter how bad things get, there's a leader ready to step up. Mm-hmm. Then you wonder if there's a line that you could ever go across where that doesn't happen. Well, here it is. I never thought anything could ever match the terror of the railway. Being in the hold was worse. At least slaving on the railway, you could move, and you had fresh air. Then another dread thought struck me. Submarines. The Kachidoku Maru had no Red Cross markings painted on it. I would later learn that none of the hell ships bore any indication that POWs were on board, as they were required to do by Geneva Convention. Red Crosses were, however, painted on Japanese ammunition carriers. My fears that without markings, we were a target for our own side. So he starts thinking, well, we're part of the Japanese fleet now. What if we get attacked by our own people? Mm-hmm. What if we get sunk? And as you can probably foresee, because this story is just misery upon misery, it happens. In the hold of the Kachidoki Maru, the torment went on. The noise was constant and deafening, an awful cacophony of throbbing engines, moaning, coughing, and occasional panic-stricken screaming, the background music for this latest torture. The chilling screams of the mad and insane would stop abruptly. I don't know how they were dealt with, but I could imagine. I was completely stuck where I was in the hold and could not move. No one could. You couldn't sit or lie down. You couldn't even go down to your haunches. There was so little room. You didn't really want to lie down anyway. It was a sea of human waste, and you risked being trampled. You had your space and protected it with your life, quite literally. You stayed strong, protecting your space with elbows and fists, by any means necessary. By this stage, it was every man for himself. Each person had their own problems to resolve, their own life to save. Again, we have not seen this yet. Every man for himself.
Yeah.
The smell inside the hold was indescribable, or a pungent stench. An overpowering mixture of excrement, urine, vomit, sweaty bodies, weeping ulcers, and rotting flesh clogged the atmosphere. There was no way we could get any fresh air. Even when the Japanese opened the hatches, it really didn't help that much. You were still breathing in what was already there. Thirst became our biggest problem. People don't understand what real thirst truly is. You start to hallucinate and see mirages. And that is the most dangerous thing. People died down in the holds from suffocation or heart attacks. The men who died were not taken away. Their bodies lay among us. So one of the other vessels that they're out with gets hit with a torpedo. American torpedo. It's another vessel that's holding prisoners of war. It is the 1,317 were killed. Or sorry, 1,317 prisoners were on board. None of them were killed by the explosion, but 1,159 of them drowned or died of exposure. And mind you, these were all guys that had served on the death railway. Guys that had already suffered just unimaginable torture. And then, as he suspected, it became their turn. 4 minutes later, we suddenly felt a tremendous blast, and an explosion tore through the hold. The whole structure shuddered, and water flooded in it from above. I knew then, as the water crashed on top of me, that my worst fears had been realized. We had been hit, and I knew that the torpedo had struck very close to us. It was, in fact, the first of 2 torpedoes that would send the hell ship to the bottom within 15 minutes. The ship tilted. We were going down.